I'd like to thank you all for having us back. I was here last year and I understood that the talk that I gave then was, and the content about One Young World was well received. So I thank you from the bottom of my heart, because sometimes these roads that we go on are not the simplest or the easiest roads, and feedback like that really does say, you know, there's something good about this. So just briefly, I'd just like to just recap the purpose of One Young World, or where David Jones, our global CEO, and I found ourselves with One Young World, was that David had said for a long time to all of us at Havas that he believed that as a creative industry, we should from time to time bend those substantial creative talents to trying to effect positive change. After all, if you could get somebody to buy extra cars and extra TV sets, you're probably very persuasive, and you could probably do a lot about positive change. And I think all of us at Havas were going, yeah, whatever. But David's fairly persistent and had said to us, you know, I'm anxious to work on positive change and social responsibility. But when I talk to the CEOs of some of the great companies of the world, I don't want them to say to me, yeah, David, fine, and what are you doing? And then I say, well, actually, you know, I'm not really doing anything. And it became an obsession with David, what were we doing? And I felt that as the youngest network in our sector, with by far the youngest holding company CEO, that the one thing we could do was something to do with young people in the future. And then I stumbled into a learning about young people, which was that you can't get to this generation or expect them to behave the way I did when I was young 100 years ago. When you talk to young people, they have a skeptical eye on marketing and marketers. They know the language. They know exactly what you're doing. They choose whether they engage with a brand or not. In my day, we just didn't. You know, if it had a lot of advertising spend, we just went and bought it anyway. And then I thought we could have, we could, because we're good at marketing, if we got young voices together, then we could get people to listen to them. Yeah, as if. And that became, I think, for me, at the heart of One Young World, was that if businesses, people who lead businesses, whether it's our industry or others, if people who lead businesses, heads of NGOs, and particularly heads of government, would listen to the voices of young people, young leaders, we would all start to lead the world in a different way, and God knows a better way, and let's face it, it wouldn't be hard to be better than where we're at today. And that really became what One Young World was about, that we would try to find the future, the leaders of tomorrow, and raise their voices early in a bid to make the rest of us listen and use these young people to force positive change upon us, if you like. And when we set up One Young World as a youth summit, we were aware that all over the world there were many, many youth summits, many ones, UN Youth Forum, ASEC. But my abiding concern as a marketer became the fact that all these things took place and nobody knew and nobody cares. Nobody cares. There is no speech made in those fora where world leaders of business or government or anything else go, did you hear what that person said? No, they don't. They really don't care. And I've shocked my own self in the last few years at finding the businesses who really don't care. And I have learned myself that when a business doesn't care about what young people think about where the world is and about the way you're going to behave, that is a bad business. And that's a business that's going to be in trouble. And many of them in the last 4 years have seen themselves into trouble. So that for me was an instructive thing as well. And it's not an easy maneuver. We're a client-facing business, as are many of you. We have over 250 FTSE clients, for FTSE top 500 clients in the UK, for example. Not all of these are businesses who see that business should live in the right way in the world, and that doing business in the right way would help you to do better. Not everybody agrees with that. I think there is a sea change in this. So One Young World is now in its 4th year. And what David and I have been trying to do everywhere we get asked to speak, is we say, well, we're going to live by the One Young World image and seed our platform to some of the brilliant people who attend One Young World every year, and who we hope, in the tiniest way, we are helping to lift their leadership in their companies and ultimately their leadership in the world. I know for certain, and that's how I manage to sleep at night, that we have among our 3,500 One Young World ambassadors worldwide, future government leaders, and some of them who will be the CEOs of their companies. And I hope, and it is my prayer every night, that they, when they come to lead and come to positions of great power, will do a better job than the incumbents are doing today. And as I say, I cannot believe that that would be that hard. So, by way of just giving you a little bit of a sense, I'd like to show you the promotional film for One Young World. And I stress it's promotional because you'll see some very famous people speaking in it. But 90% of the time at a One Young World Summit is not these big old people speaking. It's the ambassadors. So without further ado, I'll show you the film, and then I'd like to talk a little bit about our speakers this morning. Could we show that film? Thank you.
One of the things I think that is so exciting about One Young World is just the size and scale and number of countries we bring together. The only other major event that brings together more people than that is the Olympic Games.
I understand you have 183 countries here. How do you do it, David?
All of you young people here, you are revolutionary. You want to break the old systems and you want to build something new.
It's almost another United Nations, except that you have stronger voices, you are younger, you are more dynamic, and you probably have something to teach the old generation.
Please give a huge round of applause to President Bill Clinton.
The world is not sustainable, it's too unstable, and it's too unequal. All the big challenges you will face will be in one of those three categories.
We here are all the young leaders in our own rights, and we can achieve what multilateral politics has failed to do.
What we're suffering from is a chronic lack of leadership.
More people are dying because of obesity than hunger and famine. This is the first time in human history that this has happened.
Nothing can substitute for the impact of all global businesses doing business in the right way.
Businesses that operate in an ethical way will ultimately be more successful.
1 year from today, I will embark on a journey to attempt to walk to the South Pole. We aim to become a symbol for international collaboration on climate change action.
Having courage creates a space for others to be courageous.
There are two most important days in a person's life. The first is the day you were born. The second is the day you find out why.
I cry every time I hear the story of Malala. It really breaks my heart.
So the Taliban attacked Malala because she asked for school. But actually, what Malala was promoting was liberty for women and empowerment for women.
Gender diversity is no longer a female issue. 5,000 people directly impacted by our actions.
I'm optimistic because of the sheer power of change represented in this room.
We've provided solar lighting solutions across 100 villages in India in just over 2 years.
That's how it begins. You are leaders already.
This is how it's going to be. We're going to collaborate, break the system, make a new one.
Believe in what you can do, what you can achieve, and how you can make the world a better place.
Feel the power, and then when you feel it, ask yourself the question, what are you going to do with this power?
Be the one who made it possible.
So you see there's some stirring stuff, and you definitely see leaders who are truly inspirational. Could I make a couple of references here, because you can't get involved in this space and think you're not campaigning. Could I point out to you that on May the 17th is Food Revolution Day, which is Jamie's movement. It drew millions of people last year. when we had him in Pittsburgh last year, the city of Pittsburgh, to acknowledge Jamie's pioneering work in the United States. And, you know, he's getting those pink slime factories closed. Whatever the shock jocks say, he's actually getting it done. And he joined us in Pittsburgh, and the city of Pittsburgh declared itself a food revolution city. And watching that guy work and seeing the dedication that he puts into his fight against obesity and his fight for people to be given balanced meals is really, for me, something that just makes me get out of bed in the morning. And the thing that is interesting about these people is you look at Jamie. Jamie was almost 25 when they started filming the first series on 15, his program for educating the unemployed youngsters and making chefs out of them. Geldof himself was, when he did the first Band-Aid recording, was under 30. And yet you look at the things that those movements just of themselves have actually changed and achieved. I find it myself absolutely humbling. And I find the whole experience of listening to what young people want and what they think we're supposed to be doing one of the best things personally in the whole world. What we've done at Havas Worldwide in the UK is we have 2 One Young World ambassadors on our board, and it's something we're going to be doing throughout the company, again lifting these people up. And then in other companies, we have over 200 companies send delegates to One Young World and help us to find and raise these very finest and the very best. And the names are just, you know, you name it, from Google to whatever, they're all there. All of their best young people are there. So today I'm really delighted and honored to have with me 3 of our One Young World ambassadors, and I'll introduce them, just a little bit of context about them, and then introduce them individually. So you saw on the film there Anthony Jenkins of Barclays, and as you're all well up on social media and media, I know that you know what Anthony is doing with Barclays, and I again find that incredibly moving and one of the most courageous things I think I've ever seen in business. And one of Anthony's ambassadors to One Young World is with us this morning, is Lawrence Gaston. And Lawrence is just 27. Hard to believe when you hear them speaking, but he's just 27. Previously worked at Oracle and at the New York Mellon Bank, and then joined Barclays in 2011, where he is one of the teams inside Barclays who have been leading discussions and progress around good business, and is also a member of the internal panels that have advised Anthony on the work that he's doing. Anthony's own words to me about Lawrence was he's everything that a One Young World ambassador and an ambassador for business ought to be, and we'll hear from him shortly. He's also been instrumental in something which is about to be launched in early July. The Barclays Launchpad, which is their internal program where they look to support social entrepreneurs. Ray Farnan is a practitioner and an associate at PwC. And Ray attended summits for One Young World in Zurich and in Pittsburgh, and was one of the founding members of the PwC One Young World Network, which is PwC's internal network, which exists to encourage employees at PwC to do the things about which they are passionate, which I find a fascinating thing. And I was at their second event a few months ago, linking up hundreds of people across the PwC network, all run by the One Young World ambassadors, which I just find astonishing. And Ray and Lawrence and some of their colleagues at PwC and at Barclays have been among a group of young people who did something amazing that I wasn't even aware of. We've set up at One Young World something called the One Young World Social Business Accelerator, which is where we give loans to social businesses that are starting up all over the world. And it's really, I believe in it because Mohammed Yunus is a great friend of mine, but I find it a difficult thing to do. And when we started doing it, I said, oh, for God's sake, you know, that means another set of due diligence and lawyers and bank accounts and, oh God, and the first thing's in Cambodia, and who the hell's going to do that? And then to my astonishment, as these grants were made and the loans were put into place, I found that all of that work, all of that due diligence, setting up the companies, sorting out all of that shit, I know many of you have set up companies yourselves, all of that stuff was being done pro bono by One Young World ambassadors in London and done in the blink of an eye, pro bono, everything being done. And these are some of them. The youngest member over there, just 24, is Catherine Thompson, who is a One Young World ambassador from Unilever, self-described as a geek. She is a business and technology employee at Unilever, and is one of the leaders of the One Young World Unilever cohort. And Paul Polman's own words for his use for One Young World and why he and both Anthony are strategic partners of One Young World is Paul logged on to the fact that he could use his brilliant youngsters in Unilever to deliver his sustainable living plan, which you will know if you know Unilever, you know that this is Paul's great passion and indeed his great success. So Catherine is one of the people that Paul has charged with driving, using the models to deliver sustainable living right throughout their business and beyond their business. And what she's trying to do is engage the One Young World ambassadors as they go forward in driving sustainable principles beyond the Unilever cohorts, which is a really big job. So a 27-year-old and a 24-year-old. And they're going to talk to you today about when we engage with very young people in today's business world, what is the context for that? How are brands sitting within that? How do we need to talk to them? What is the expectation of the employer brand? How do you behave as an employer? What do they want from you as an employer? What do they expect as employees? And then further and beyond that, what are the absolute unbreakable rules if you want to engage with this unbelievably valuable constituency? And I promise you, if you take one thing away from them today, I promise you one thing. If you look at your own businesses and the way you are living in business, if you listen to these and take up just one of the things that they say and start asking the young leaders in your own businesses, what would they change and how do they want things to be? I promise you from the bottom of my heart, I promise you, you will have a better and a more successful business. I promise you it works. So when they've done, they're each going to speak and then they'll be delighted to take questions, and trust me, they're up for questions, so you can make the questions tough if you want to. So I'm going to go first to Lawrence.
Good morning. Thanks, Kate, for warming us up. So I just wanted to give a bit of insight. I'm very fortunate that I get to attend One Young World as an ambassador and actually be part of it. And I'll tell you one thing, it's the forum that probably has the most energy and the most enlightening conversations amongst people you can possibly imagine. So what I really want to try and do is give you a little bit of insight as to what the current themes are that are being discussed, what makes us as the future generation a bit different from the previous generation, and then kind of how that ties together with brands. So in terms of how, to give you a bit of insight into what sort of the theme is, previous generations, when we looked to companies, it was all about being the biggest, the best, the most profitable. You were judged on essentially what you could offer people, the product or the service. And that was really what was marketed. It was what products were sold upon. And so it was all about sort of essentially economic expansion. Over sort of the past few generations, there's been huge capacity to essentially get bigger and bigger and bigger and consume more. And then sort of my generation was born. And suddenly everything had grown so big, everything had been sold, everything had been marketed. And I think we've got to a point where we now live in a world of essentially there's only limited resource. We also have a higher sense of duty and social fairness perhaps to those around us. And what that means is that our priorities are somewhat different from the previous generation. Whereas before, everything was about expansion, about being big, what we've come to realize is that we've gone so far down that road, and that road can't carry on forever. And what we're now sort of struggling with is, okay, we've achieved all this great stuff, maybe not always in the most fair way, but it's now about how do you sustain that? You know, all this progress that has been made, the question now is around sustainability and the role that sort of we can play and we expect companies to play in helping us ensure that all this progress made doesn't come at the expense of the people we sort of interact with or the resources we have in this world. And so the big theme at One Young World, especially in a corporate sense, is around sustainability, because previous generations have been judged on growth. We're very much conscious that this generation will be very much measured by how we pass the world on to the next generation. So we very much have a role as stewards. And in that sense, what that means is we then look to the companies we interact with. You know, how does that affect the way that we regard the brands that we buy and the services we use? And often companies perceive it that we're actually asking more of them than we really have a right to. You know, they deliver a product or service, you know, surely that's enough. But it's no longer about what brands and companies do, it's how they do it and how they deliver it. And interestingly, the brands that do this really well have actually managed to turn this into a sort of a great part of their corporate culture and a great sort of set of values that we can link into. So from a brand's perspective, it's a win-win, because if you can essentially touch my sense of values, my sense of purpose, and show that you're doing something similar, that you share my concerns around sustainability and ensuring business is conducting itself in the right way, suddenly we've got more than a connection about a product or service. You're actually sharing my values and my beliefs. And then that really gives your brand and your product something extra. I heard from, I think, Catherine, and we found some research the other day that said people can usually define themselves in 3 brands. It tends to be sort of how it works. And I know the people at the One Young World Forum, which are, you know, several thousand of the most energized sort of future leaders you're ever going to come across, believe me. And if they pick 3 brands, I know they will pick brands that reflect their values and what they stand for. And I'm sure everyone here would as well, we just maybe haven't always thought about it directly. But at the same time, this can't just be lip service to say, you know, we do this in a sustainable way, so on and so forth. You know, put it on a poster, everyone's going to believe it, because as Kate mentioned, we are the biggest bunch of cynics. You know, we don't believe, we sort of have seen through marketing speak, we recognise all that. And so what really matters to us is being able to trust brands, to be able to say, if you are doing this and you're doing it in the right way, make sure you do. Because as soon as you slip up, unfortunately in this day and age, there's no longer a public image and a private image. You very much have anything that you say will become public. Anything that you do behind the factory wall becomes public. I mean, look at the terrible disaster of Primark a few weeks ago in the factory they use. You know, years ago that wouldn't have become public, but unfortunately it is, you know, fortunately it is now. And so if you're going to do it, be genuine, be authentic, because that's what we're looking for. Now, I'm going to wrap up there just and leave that thought with you about sort of, you know, what we're really searching for is fairness and authentic brands that look at how they conduct business as much as what they do in business. And I just want to hand over to Ray, who's going to say a bit about employers and what we look for in employers. Thank you very much.
That was Lawrence's slide. You didn't miss much. All right, good morning. As Lawrence said, I'm going to talk about what we expect from employers as the young generation. And I'm going to hopefully draw on some of the views of my peers as well, so it's not just my opinion that you're hearing. So what do we expect from an employer? I've attempted to summarise it by using 3 issues that I believe are crucial for any employer in terms of defining their brand identity. Inclusivity, agility, and finding your passion. So first, inclusivity. Often a company's approach to delivering training or communicating their strategy, I've observed, is that they'll say something along the lines of, we want to achieve X, and so we need Y from you. And it creates a sort of them and us culture. I think it's far more powerful if a firm can create a shared objective culture. And what this sounds like is much more along the lines of, we as a company aim to do X, and your role as part of that company to achieve this is to do Y. And while that point sort of sounds a little bit like it's centered on semantics, what I want to sort of draw out is the shift in attitude that that requires. So rather than talking at junior and young employees, it's talking with. And if you do that, then you're going to get enhanced engagement, and inevitably you're going to get a higher performing member of staff. I think that it's vital for employers to focus on that, especially with junior and the young, because it's harder to be inclusive when there's not a lot of experience there. Because there's the natural tendency to think, well, if there's not the experience, then why include? But where young people may lack experience, they do make up for it in innovative thinking and the enthusiasm that they bring to the table. And I would encourage any employer to ask for feedback and act on it. But more important is to do the difficult part, which is to actually involve the young in management decisions and in leadership initiatives. And that is difficult, especially where, I mean, I work in tax, and it's not something that our business necessarily lends itself to, because you need a level of technical expertise to then be able to lead and take management decisions. But there are ways around it, and Kate cited a couple of examples as how she does it. And if successfully done, then it also has the side effect of increasing transparency and also increasing the credibility of the brand. So inclusive culture is number one on my list. Number two on my list for employers is the need to increase or recognise the need for increased flexibility in the workplace. My peers and I have noticed, but we've also been told that our generation want to move jobs more often. They want more experiences, a wider range of skills in the job that they're doing. And while some firms and people perceive that as negative, that you don't want to stay in a job for as long as perhaps the previous generation did, if channeled in the right way, that character trait can be very powerful. And the positive effect would be that you could have a really agile workforce that's able to adapt to a fast-changing market and also able to approach a range of different problems and come up with a range of creative solutions. That agility should also be reflected in the way in which people work, be it remotely, face-to-face, online meetings, single office location, multiple office locations. And ultimately, I don't think without embracing the need for agility and that inclusivity, that it's possible to actually maximise the employer-employee relationship in the modern day. That didn't sound good, did it? That did not sound good. So, on top of agility and inclusivity, the final point that I wanted to make in terms of being crucial for any employer to consider in defining their brand is to recognise and value the need for any employee to find their passion in what they do. And this comes from my own experience of attending One Young World, which actually it's sometimes quite difficult to know what you're doing there, especially as somebody who's part of PwC. You know, there's a full range of people at One Young World, and you think, you know, what's your role there? There's lots of inspirational talks, Bob Geldof speaking, Desmond Tutu, Kofi Annan, and it's quite hard to distill down at first what that's going to mean in terms of when you go back to your business. Because undoubtedly, when you do go back, you go back with more energy, you go back with the desire to actually make stuff happen instead of waiting for someone to ask you. But to understand why that is and replicate it was what we then tried to think about. And in trying to replicate it, we tried to find the common theme that was across all the people that I knew that had attended One Young World and come back with this sort of energy. And the common theme was that whilst we'd all taken different things from the experience, we all learned more about what we were passionate about. And what that meant was, yes, we got involved in some new initiatives. I started working with social entrepreneurs, which was not something that I'd done before. But also, in what I was doing in my day job, I recognised what parts of my job I was actually passionate about. Believe it or not, it's not actually the tax calculation itself, but it's actually working with the people for me. For some other people, they're really passionate about problem solving. So recognising that all employees need to go through that in order to better apply themselves at a job is vital. And I don't think that there's actually a more powerful place for a company to be than to have its employees working in an area where they're applying themselves, and they're applying themselves against something that they're passionate about. So that's my attempt to summarise the key points to consider in developing any employer's brand in the modern day. I think it's also crucial to be aware of those three issues when you're advertising job opportunities or building a workforce. And hopefully that's clear from the comments that I've made. But as Kate said, happy to take any questions on that later. I'm going to hand over to Catherine now, who's going to talk to you about the wider agenda.
Cool. So as you've heard, the future generation of marketers, of customers and of employees are very different. We've grown up in a different world with very different priorities, and this means that we have different expectations from both from brands and from employers. We believe firmly in honesty and transparency. We expect to be part of the conversation, and if we're not, we at least expect to be told about it. If you say sorry for doing something wrong, we'll probably forgive you. But if you lie to us, we're brutally unforgiving and ashamedly well connected. So if you make sure that you build this into your culture and your communications. We are the digital generation. Our identity is defined as much as it is online as it is offline, and we are always on, always connected, always alert. Facebook has changed the way that we form relationships and maintain them, and Twitter has reshaped the way that society works as a whole. We have all borne witness to how one desperate graduate has changed the world through his actions. Through the power of social media and through the power of people, he changed the course of a continent. Mohammed Bouazi could never have anticipated what would happen when he set himself on fire on the 17th of December 2010 in a protest over youth unemployment and social injustice in Tunisia. Interconnectedness allows us to work faster and be experts in everything. It accelerates and amplifies. It enables us to be curators and producers, journalists and editors, historians and geographers, inventors, investors, creators and campaigners. As employers, you need to enable us to embrace all that we can be through allowing us the flexibility that will allow us to reach our potential. And as brands, you need to fit into our world. We may be the digital generation, but we are also the sustainability generation. We have grown up under the cloud of peak oil conflict, climate change and rising sea levels. Within our lifetimes, we have witnessed the results of these things, and many of the habits of older generations that are just beginning to grasp have been ingrained into us since infancy. Turning off the lights, turning off the taps when you clean your teeth, sorting your rubbish into recyclables and non-recyclables are not enough. We are an ever-connected online generation with an ethical heart. For us, not doing what is right for the planet and what is right for the world is plainly unacceptable. Have a think about your organisation. Do you have a clear, transparent message about what you're doing to make tomorrow brighter than today? If not, why not? Existence for the sake of economic maximisation is now redundant in our eyes. The fat cats have had their moment. Now it is time to right social injustice from the very heart of the system that caused the majority of it. How is it that your company, that you, can act to make a positive difference to the world? The payback will be motivated staff, talent attraction, satisfied customers, and if you're doing it right, sustainable business growth, meaning that your shareholders will be happy and you can go to sleep at night knowing that you've made a difference, and maybe you can ignite the passion of your employees while you're at it. I would like to challenge you today that if you don't already know the purpose of your company and of your brands, to go out and find out what they are. And once you decide, make it stick. Make it bigger than a strategy, bigger than a CEO, because a purpose should be more than a campaign or a comms plan. It should be the very reason why your business opens its doors every morning. And if you go back on your promises without at least showing that you've tried, the whole world is listening and they're only one click away. Thank you very much.
So we'd like to take questions, and if you want to ask a question, could you say who you are and perhaps your company? Does that make sense? Ready to go? Blown away. I will put, I think, a first question that I'd like to say to, I think, all three of you. When you look at this issue of the purpose of your companies and how you feel you are able to take part in that, what is your role in that in your company, and how have you been able to affect things? You go to you first, Lawrence.
So, yeah, purpose, I mean, if purpose is going to really work in a company, I imagine surely it has to cascade through the whole organisation. Having it as a mission statement or a slogan on a letterhead isn't really going to be that effective. So I think the reason that a purpose is there is because it really affects everybody. It's meant to be a statement that's suitably broad, that it sort of is relevant to everyone, but also gives direction that whatever you're doing, it governs the decisions you make. And so if you're going to have a purpose, it has to be relevant to everyone in the organisation, so that when I show up each day, I know that what I'm doing, this is the framework I'm operating in. And it's about it being relevant and applicable to everyone. So yeah, I do feel as though, you know, purpose is something that I can use on a day-to-day basis and affects how I operate, yeah.
Ray?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was quite well summarised in that it's quite helpful to have that broad structure. And I mean, our sort of tagline, PwC's doing the right thing for our clients, our people and our communities. And that could be a statement that's really difficult to interpret, and you're like, well, what's the right thing? But what it allows is it gives you a license to operate in your day-to-day job, and you can use your own personal approach and put your own personal stamp on it, but you're aware that whenever you're out there in the marketplace or at an event like this or anything, you are representing your brand, and what you stand for is essentially what the company stands for.
Catherine?
So in Unilever we have a purpose for Unilever, which is making sustainable living commonplace, but we also have a purpose for every single one of our brands. And so each of our brands, Dove, Hellmann's, will have a purpose, and every single decision that is made about the strategy of that brand, the comms of that brand, that purpose is taken into account and really helps drive why is it that we're doing this campaign, how will it help us to achieve that purpose. And I think it's really making sure, as I just said, making sure that it's more than a comms plan or a strategy, and making sure that that purpose is going to be something that's really, really long term and is really, truly why that thing exists.
Anybody else?
I've got a question actually, Kate.
Oh. Okay, I'll come back to you. Yes. What's your name? What's your number?
James Trezona, Mason Zimmer. Really interesting point about bringing young people into your hierarchy. So I think a lot of the problem here, and the point about tax is a good example, that we're kind of still in an industrial model where the person who's been doing it for a long time goes to the top. But then there's a hierarchical problem of how do you involve people in decision making who may be best placed to make it, not based on experience. So I think it makes sense, but it's very hard to have flat structures in big companies. Do you know any companies that are doing it well, and how they're doing it?
Well, I can give a couple of examples. I mean, first of all, an action like Kate discussed, which is to put two young people just on the board and stick them in the firing line there to influence the decisions and be involved in the discussion, is one thing. Where I've had a really good experience is actually where it's those people that are at the top that recognise that they need to come back down and start talking to the people who are more junior and who are younger. And that's not just in the forum of coming to do a presentation to them. What I'm on about is one-to-one, here's a problem that I've got, what do you think that I should do about it? You know, and set out what the issues are, the factors are, and quite often they're not technical, they're not tax related. And by doing that, you can then input into the decision.
Thank you very much. Please leave the furniture here if you'd just like to take some seats down there. That would be great. Thank you very much.